in collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, we discuss in detail the framework, or indeed the lack of one, that governs the appointment of advisors and consultants to the government.
The biggest problem is that there are no checks and balances, and those who take decisions, both the presidential panel, but on many occasions the parliament also, and the political parties, do not want to set any framework, any limitations in what they want to do.
And this weekend, the first ever conference on primary care in the health sector takes place.
We will have presentations from some people who have looked at, for example, referrals and looked at the guidelines that are being developed to help personal doctors practice more effectively or more efficiently.
There's been yet more on social media this week following the President's appointment of a beautician as a member of the staff at the Presidential Palace. This is in the wake of a teenager who worked on his presidential campaign deciding after all she didn't want to take up the offer of a job because there was an outcry on social media about employing a 19-year-old as an advisor at the Presidential Palace. And that follows on from the appointment straight after he was elected of a very famous Greek pop star as the Deputy Minister of Culture. Now, all this outcry has meant that people have said there should be checks and balances in place when it comes to political appointments. Apparently, there have been promises such checks and balances will be enacted, but meanwhile, all these appointments go on. So I'm joined on this week's programme by Christoforos Christoforou, who's a political analyst, been following politics in Cyprus for many years. Christoforos, what do you make of this? I mean, it just seems that there are no checks and balances on whether or not anybody can become a political appointee. And if we look at the past president's terms of office, he made some of these people permanent civil servants, didn't he? What's going on?
Yeah, there are two points there to make. The first that is about purely political appointments, and the second is about appointments that are not purely political, in the sense that there are already specific rules to follow. So, with regard to political appointments, there has been a lot since the Republic was set in 1960, and we saw this during the previous presidency of Nikos Anastasiadis and the recent decision of the Court of Labor Issues, where the political appointments became permanent appointments, which is the biggest problem on how things can turn, because first, political appointments should be based on certain criteria. And despite the fact that, as it was published in the press in 2019, such criteria were set, a set of rules, it appeared the next day that these criteria that everyone had in mind that existed, in fact, were abolished some months later. So the biggest problem is that there are no checks and balances, as you said it, and those who take decisions, both the presidential panel, but on many occasions the parliament also, and the political parties, do not want to set any framework, any limitations in what they want to do. So this is a big problem.
It's quite clear that basically the only criteria, if you want a plum job paid for by you and me with taxpayers' money, then all you need to do is have very good connections with whoever's sitting in the presidential chair or to work on their election campaigns.
Okay. I think that the problem is also can be put from a different angle. When we are talking about political appointments, there is a big margin for the person that makes a political appointment to decide. Okay, the big issue is whether this margin is used in a way that complies with certain rules, and the rules is a rational approach of qualifications of the person, and not on just general qualifications, but also knowledge, being this person knowledgeable about the issue that is going to take up. So here is also the big problem, because we saw it in the case of the 19-year-old that was appointed by the Deputy Minister of Tourism. We saw it now with what was published yesterday about the esthetician, and so on and so forth. And this is not only the problem; the problem is also that there are no specific posts, specific positions that are set by any legal framework. I mean that in the presidential palace, for example, the president has for many years, any president, appointing what we call commissioners. There is no specific legal framework to say which posts of commissioners do exist.
So are you telling me that basically, once you're sitting in the presidential chair, you can create as many positions as you like as consultants, commissioners, or whatever else? So you can pass all these around to your friends, and nobody's saying, hang on, you've already got 10, why do you need 15?
Yes, of course. And for example, we heard that the president said he will set a commissioner for overseas Cypriots, and they will set also a commissioner for migration, and so on and so forth. But the main issue is also a constitutional one. There is nothing in the Constitution which gives this kind of power to the president. In the Constitution, the executive powers of the president are very limited. Very few people know this, that the presidential powers are very limited in the Constitution. And the big part of executive power lies with the Council of Ministers. But nevertheless, it has been a kind of tradition that the president appoints a lot of people around him under also the guise of temporary or limited time appointments. He finds a way to make these persons appointed permanently despite the existing laws. So here we are. And one may ask, what is the parliament doing on this?
Well, it's not doing very much, is it? But that's partly, presumably, because a lot of parliamentarians themselves make use of sinecures for friends and family to work in their parliamentary offices.
Yeah, this is one of the issues, and the way this problem is interconnected, because many times there is an agreement between the two, a tacit agreement, and they do, each one does what they want. The parliamentarians appoint and employ what they call parliamentary aides, which at the end of the day they are not parliamentary aides. They are just serving party affairs, not related to the job of the deputy. Okay, they are just promoting the party, and they are called parliamentary aides. And it transpired also last week that even the present president of the parliament, she appointed a student from which belonged to the party youth, for 9 months to do something specific on IT work in the parliament. So if the breach, the violation of rules is at this level, the level of the President of the Republic, the level of the President of the Parliament, and the level of the Parliament itself, so what one could expect from people in other administrative posts, they will find ways and the window to make the people they choose enter in the public service or being paid by the state without abiding by the rules.
There has been an outcry, particularly on social media, about all of this, and the one thing I forgot to mention in the introduction was the guy in Paphos who works for a very big hotel chain, or certainly did, whose university qualifications were bought. I mean, it just makes me wonder whether or not if the outcry is loud enough, anything might change.
It's not the only problematic issue. I can disclose and tell you that this weekend I sent a letter to the President of the Republic about 2 of his deputy ministers, because what happens in the official CV of the Deputy Minister of Culture said that he studied in the Royal Academy of Music of London. Hachigiannis studied there, but this has nothing to do. Hachigiannis has maybe passed the exams in one of the private schools where they give private lessons about music, and the exams are coming from outside. For language, they may come from Cambridge or from Oxford, etc. But this doesn't mean that someone studied in Oxford or Cambridge. So this has to be clear. And also the Deputy Minister of Tourism says that he studied this and that, etc. But he doesn't say in his bio where he studied, from when to when. And another thing, he says that he was a visiting professor at a university. But when did he acquire the grade of professor? Because it's another thing to be a visiting lecturer and another thing to be a professor.
So are you basically saying that a lot of the people who are currently holding very well-paid jobs in our government don't actually have the qualifications? If we're talking about deputy ministers, I thought that the Constitution did say that there was an age limit and that there were certain qualifications that had to be met.
No. Actually, the Constitution says nothing about ministers. The only qualification they should have is the age. They should be at the age of someone who is eligible to the parliament. It was 25 and now is 21, the age. And also this person should not have been convicted by court for something gravely immoral, etc. Or he's not declared by the court as insane, as a person who cannot rule himself, etc. So these are the only limitations and the criteria that are set in the Constitution. But the problem is not about qualifications that are required. The problem here is of a moral issue. It's a moral issue. One who is occupying a public post should be very clear and say clearly what and exactly what his or her qualifications are and when these qualifications were acquired.
Yeah, well, falsifying your qualifications is surely a great indication of moral turpitude, isn't it? I mean, does that not disqualify these people?
The big issue is at the higher level. It should be a rule from authorities, from the presidential palace, from the parliament, from political parties, etc., that these issues should be checked before any person is appointed. And this check should be made either by the authority itself or by an independent authority. This is also with regard to the declaration of property and assets, etc., etc. Actually, there is this declaration, but there is no real check by any independent body that the assets that are declared are the assets which this person has in reality. So there's a lot of gaps and omissions.
Well, one might ask what the Civil Service Commission is doing. There was a bit of a scandal about the appointment there as well, wasn't there?
In the case of political appointments, where this commission has nothing to do. So it's an issue of the authority that makes the appointment.
Well, it does seem as if we need to do something, and we need to do it fairly soon before every Tom, Dick and Harry who happens to be pals with somebody up at the presidential palace ends up working there and getting a fat pension and possibly a lifelong job in our civil service.
Yeah, what you say is what was expected by the president when he was a candidate. He promised several things, and one of the things it was that he would appoint a consultative council that would make proposals and also check the qualifications of persons that could be appointed in various posts that are provided by the Constitution or by the laws, etc. But we are already almost 3 months in power, and no move has been towards this goal as promised.
Christophoros, I'm sure we will talk again, because it doesn't seem to me that this is going away anytime soon, but many thanks for your time telling us all about it today.
Thank you, Rosie.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the fourth series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
The Department of Primary Care and Population Health of the Medical School of the University of Nicosia is organising the first ever Primary Care Conference here in Cyprus. It has the support of the Cyprus Society of General Medicine, the Cyprus Association of Family Doctors, and the Cyprus Society of Internal Medicine. It's all about the current medical and legal topics that arise from the implementation of our national health system. Joining us to tell us more is Professor Kevork Hopayan from the University of Nicosia Medical School. Kevork, first time we've done this, that seems extraordinary to me. Surely doctors are regularly conferencing about particularly legal matters, but also current medical practice.
Okay, perhaps the title is not reflecting exactly what we mean to say. It's the first time that all these organisations have come together, though of course general practitioners, like other doctors, have held conferences in the past. So this is the first one that brings all organisations together, and it's certainly the the first to reassess the changes that have taken place since the introduction of the National Health Service.
And what are those changes mainly? Because apart from the fact that we now have a family doctor, surely the actual medical profession is still doing much the same as it's done before.
Previously, a lot of care was performed by specialists. That's to say, specialists in certain systems of the body, such as the lungs and the heart. The introduction of personal doctoring means that Cyprus is moving more towards having what the rest of Europe has, which is to say a general practitioner. So all adults will be registered with a general practitioner, should they wish to take this up, who will provide continuing care and the first point of contact for care before the specialist services are engaged. This is a change for Cyprus, and it has been accompanied by both legal and financial systems to make it work.
And how is it working? Because in the early days, there were a lot of referrals to specialists, much like we used to do. And of course, if you look at the finances of GESI, our National Health Service, they can't cope with that, can they? So certain new rules have been brought in. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
In answer to how is the system working, I won't prejudge what the conference is going to demonstrate. We will have presentations from some people who have looked at, for example, referrals, which you mentioned, and looked at the guidelines that are being developed to help personal doctors practice more effectively or more efficiently. And that's exactly what we'll be looking at. You mentioned that there have been problems, but they're teething problems because all countries that have introduced a National Health Service and have introduced primary care have been through this. Each will have different sets of problems when it starts because the starting position was different. Certainly in the United Kingdom, when the NHS was introduced in 1948, there were problems in the first few years, and there have been major reforms since then.
Is the conference going to look at whether or not more reforms are needed here in Cyprus?
No, at the moment we'll be sharing experiences and sharing the results of some analyses that have been conducted by general practitioners. I should also say that although we are looking at the successes made by GESI, the new National Health Service, we are also looking at clinical matters, that's to say medical matters. So there will also be presentations on disease management and also on consultation skills, something that the University of Nicosia has been pioneering in the region, first in the undergraduate course and since 2015 in now postgraduate course.
You're talking about the problem-based learning that you do there and the emphasis on communication skills, I think, which is something that particularly among older doctors is a very new idea, because back in the day you went to the doctor who told you that he would prescribe you this or you had to do that, and if you dared to ask why, you were given very short shrift.
I can certainly remember that from when I was a child, and things have certainly changed over the lifetime of my generation.
And what about now, though? The doctors that are practicing here in Cyprus, and many of them are of the older generation, they're not familiar with this methodology, are they?
Okay, well, communication skills isn't just about the attitude taken to giving advice. Communication skills involves also a style that helps to elicit much better the patient's problems. And yes, it does include what you're saying, which is to involve the patient in making decisions. This isn't altogether new, because although you pointed to the problems of the past, many older doctors developed these skills themselves. For many people, it came quite naturally. But like all skills, they can be improved. And like all skills, there are those who don't necessarily come to them naturally, but can nevertheless learn them. So I think it would be wrong to suggest that all older doctors who haven't had this training do not actually have communication skills. To clarify that a little more, they may well have those communication skills, though they may not yet have developed that attitude of involving the person in the final decision. We shouldn't mix those two things up.
No, fair enough, but I mean, what I'm talking about really is empathy, because I'm sure you'd agree as a doctor that if you have a rapport with your patient, they are much more likely to divulge the information you need to know to make a correct diagnosis, whereas if they're not really feeling some connection with their doctor, they're very likely not to tell you half the things you need to know.
Of course, and I would reiterate that many doctors of generations before had that empathy, were able to demonstrate empathy. In communication skills, one of the things we're trying to do is to improve the way in which they do so that it can be more effective. And of course, there may be some, certainly, we wouldn't say everybody, but there are some who may have less ability at communicating, and communication skills are there to enhance the starting point.
This is happening tomorrow on the 20th of May at the UNESCO Amphitheatre in the University of Nicosia. That can hold a lot of people. Have you any idea how many have already registered and which types of medicine they come from?
This is open to general practitioners or personal doctors, so most of the attendees will be from that group. We have opened it up to our senior undergraduate medical students because we think it will be of interest to many of them. We have so far over 40 registrations, and we know that there are more planning to attend on the day, but who haven't completed their online registration.
And can people do that? I mean, if somebody's listening to this and thinks, oh, maybe I ought to go to that, they can still register?
They can. There will be registration available on the day, but they will need to bring some cash with them, because they will have missed the opportunity to do online bank transfer.
OK, and so what does it cost?
€40, which I think is good value for a whole-day conference.
And you've got your guest speakers all from Cyprus or some coming from abroad?
We have representatives from the Ministry of Health and from the National Health Service itself. The vast majority of the speakers are personal doctors working in Cyprus.
And so best practices and the common challenges faced by primary care. Once the conclusions of the conference, I presume there's discussion about a lot of what is going to be said. Once the conclusions are in, are you presumably hopeful that the representatives from the Health Ministry and the healthcare system will take on board any suggestions that come up?
Well, relationships between the NHS, or GESI, and those who've been conducting some of the analyses have been very good. We hope that by holding this conference and publishing the proceedings, the learning that we have done will be made widely available, and we are certain that there will be continuing work between us, the three societies, and the NHS.
Well, that's happening tomorrow, the 20th of May, from 9 in the morning till 5 p.m. at the University of Nicosia UNESCO Amphitheatre. And I'm sure that there will be a lot of things coming out of that conference. You've said it's going to be published, so doubtless that will also be sent out to the people who took part in the conference. One thing we should say is that the official language of the conference is Greek, although I think there will be a couple of presentations in English. But to get the best out of the whole day, it presumably means you should be a fluent Greek speaker. Gevork Hoprayan, thank you very much for joining me. Best of luck with your conference.
Thank you very much, Rosie.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.